Hi, this is Kelly Fry. I'm the editor of the Oklahoman, and I am here this afternoon with Stan Hufeld. Stan is a former CEO of Integris Medical, how do you say the whole thing, Stan?
Well, Integris Health.
Integris Health and Baptist Medical Center.
Yeah.
I'm always wanting to blend those two together. We are here today to talk about Dr. Nazih Zuhdi. Dr. Zuhdi died last night, and we just invited Stan in today to talk a little bit about what he remembers about Dr. Zuhdi. Stan, tell us a little bit about the first time you met Dr. Zuhdi.
Well, first off, Reader's Digest used to have this series called The Most Incredible Person I Ever Met. And if I were to write in that series, it'd be Dr. Zuhdi. He was an extraordinary human being. He could be exacerbating, he could be irritating, but he was never dull. And so it was just a great delight. I got here in 1987. He'd already done several heart transplants by then, but the program was still pretty new. So he and I became great friends because primarily he wanted to always do something else. Whatever he did, once he did the first heart transplant, he wanted to do a lung transplant. And once he did a lung transplant, he wanted to do a 2 lung transplant. And once he did that, then he wanted to do liver transplants. So, he was never satisfied. He always wanted to go sort of the next step, and he was relentless.
Right.
And that's what made him interesting.
And you've got to have a little bit of an ego, not that that's a negative thing, but if you believe you can do something. You were telling me before we started about his first heart transplant.
Well, yeah, actually, when he wanted to do the first liver transplant.
Oh, okay.
But the first time I met him, I'd never met him before. And there was a 10K race downtown, and we were the medical sponsor of the 10K race. And somebody had the idea of, let's put some of our heart transplant patients in to walk in the race to show how well they were doing as a result of their transplant. And I thought, what a great idea. So we set up the medical tent, and we were all prepared the next day, Saturday, for this big event. And I get a call from Nazih Zuhdi. Now, I'd never met the man. I was brand new. And he told me that he was looking at the brochures of the race, and there was an ad for Budweiser beer in about the race. And he says to me, I will not have my heart transplant patients involved with Budweiser beer. We must withdraw from the race today. I said, okay. Let me come talk to you, Dr. Zuhdi. So I went down there, and so I'm thinking to myself, I'm a pretty experienced chief executive. I've dealt with interesting, difficult doctors before. I'll handle this. So I went down to see Dr. Zuhdi and met him, and I explained to him that we'd already paid a lot of money to be the sponsor. We'd set the tent up. We'd made all the plans, and I understood his objection to mixing beer and medicine. But let's find another way to make that point, not this one, given the time constraints. So I left there thinking, I had persuaded him that I was right and to back off. An hour later, I get a phone call from public relations, and they say, we just want you to know that Dr. Zuhdi has ordered 5 of these signs that you pull behind a truck, where you put the letters on the thing.
Oh, no.
And the sign says, Baptist Transplant Program against Budweiser and beer drinking. So I go, oh my God. And they said, well, do you want us to go ahead and buy these signs? I said, no, don't buy these signs. I'll go talk to Dr. Zuhdi. So I go back down, and I spend another hour with the man, and we go over, Nazih, I understand your concerns, but let's find another way. This is way over the top. And I'm thinking, okay, again, I have persuaded him. The force of my argument won him over. I'll go back to my office. An hour later, I get another call. Said, we just thought you should know that Dr. Zuhdi has ordered some poster boards and some markers, and he has the staff of the Transplant Institute on the floor making hand-lettered signs that they're going to carry tomorrow saying, Baptist Transplant Program is against Budweiser and beer. Do you want us to keep doing this? So I go back down to Nazih, and so by then I'd spent 8 hours talking about beer and transplants, and I still hadn't convinced him. So that's when I really figured out this guy, when he was focused, he was as focused as any human being I've ever met.
It sounds like it. So did he actually do anything in the parade?
No, I think finally we sort of managed to escape.
Well, you were telling me earlier about his first liver transplant.
Yes.
And tell me a little bit about that.
Well, after we were successful with heart transplants and after we were successful with kidneys and lungs, he wanted to start a liver transplant program. Now, he was not a liver surgeon, but he wanted to bring liver surgeons in, do a liver program. And like everything else, like Budweiser beer, he was relentless.
Yes.
And he was after me for months to do this program, and we had other things on the agenda, and I just wasn't quite prepared to take it to the board. And then after a while, he just sort of wore me down. I mean, he was on me all the time. So I finally said, okay, we will do all the necessary planning. We're going to have to bring in some skilled surgeons. We're going to have to buy equipment. We're going to have to train, all those kind of things. So it's an expensive program. And we're going to have to take it to our board for approval. And so what I would like for you, Nazih, to do is I would like you to begin the presentation to the board with just a description of why you think liver transplantation would be important for Baptist Medical Center. But we're very tightly scripted in our board meetings, and so I have a 20-minute presentation, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes on the front side just to talk about why we should do this, and then we'll take over and talk about the expense and all those kind of things. Mm-hmm. So he says, and he still had his accent, as he always had, beautiful accent. He says, "Stanley, you trust me, I do 5 minutes, no problem." Now, I'd been around long enough to figure out I need to make sure that he really understood. So I went back to him 2 or 3 times. I said, 5 minutes, Nazih, 5 minutes. I'd like to give you more, but you got 5 minutes. Stanley, you trust me, I do 5 minutes. So it comes time to the board meeting. I bring Nazih in to the board meeting and say, "Dr. Zuhdi, would you tell the board why we should do liver transplants?" And the first words out of his mouth are, he says, "I am Nazih Zuhdi, son of Abraham." And then he goes into this description of the early life and times of Nazih Zuhdi in the Middle East. And he spends 10 minutes doing that, and then by then he talks about his experience in England. So he's used up 20 minutes of what was a total 20-minute program, and he hasn't even come to the United States for his training yet. And so the board's looking at their watch, and I'm over there dying. So I finally said, "Dr. Zuhdi, hold on just a second." I turned to the board and I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have one of 2 choices. Either you can approve this program now, not having seen any evidence, or I'll invite Dr. Zuhdi back next month." Moved, seconded. So they approved the program without ever seeing a shred of evidence. All they know was they didn't want to go through it again next month.
Well, in all seriousness, he was a fine, fine doctor.
He was an unbelievable surgeon. He was an unbelievable talent. He was a interesting, perplexing, charming person. He could charm anybody. He was the most, I mean this correctly, the most self-possessed, most self-aware, most confident in his own ability person I've ever met. And that made him challenging, but it also made him really fun to be around, because mediocre was never acceptable. Status quo was never acceptable. Being satisfied with where you were was never acceptable. It was always something else. What was the next thing we could do?
Right.
And that was a challenge, for us mortal human beings who, can get satisfied with, okay, things are okay. For him, once he did something, then it was something else. And
What's next?
As the person responsible for the budgetary impact and the organizational impact, it was always a challenge, but I loved him dearly, and I had a profound respect for him.
Well, Oklahoma City will have a long-lasting, he'll be a legend for many, many years to come.
Yes, he will.
So, thanks for coming by.
Thank you.